I'd like to call to order the City Council work session on Monday, March 14th. It is 5 o'clock. There will be a regular meeting tonight at 6 p.m. and a special meeting immediately following the regular meeting. And of course, you're all going to remind me if I forget, like I did last time. So just chime in if I forget. Councilman Stipp will not be here tonight.
Okay.
And so I need a motion, a second to excuse him.
So moved.
Second.
I heard a motion from Councilman Campbell and a second from Councilman Pizzillo. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? The ayes have it. So we only actually have one item tonight, although it's a very deep and thorough item. So we'll receive information and have an opportunity to provide feedback on the FY 17-26 Capital Improvement Program budget developed process to date. And the Budget and Research Manager, Lori Wiggenroth, will present. Now, I read this through several times, and I did take in your comments about the last time that we had something on the finance about the time, and we still want to keep some of this corralled. So after each point, we've worked on this together. I worked it at home, and then thank you for giving me your suggestions tonight. So we'll tell you when it's question time, and when it is, please make it pertinent to what you're looking at there on the subject matter, because this is all divided up. Okay. So, all right, you've got the floor.
All righty, thank you. Coming back to you today to follow up to some of the conversations that happened about the CIP earlier in the year. We talked a lot about the CIP process through the council retreats and received some great feedback through that process. So I thought what I'd do is kind of give you an overview of kind of the city council involvement in the CIP process so far this year, and then we'll move into the staff process. As you recall, at the retreats, we kind of there was a consensus on some priorities relative to the bond program or the potential bond program. There was an interest in what we have labeled the gathering place, basically recreation center, community park, pool facility project. In addition, there was an emphasis on taking care of what we have. And that was something that we talked about last year in the budget process as well. So it's a continuing theme for us. And then there was a discussion about public safety, not only with regard to police and fire, but just to safe places, safe streets, and those types of things. So it was broader than the police and fire term, public safety. After the retreats, you also gave us some ideas on projects. And so we did go back to the departments and have them cost or look at those projects, and we'll see those later as well. They were not necessarily projects where there was a consensus, but we tried to address every idea that came up in the discussion. We came to you in February with a capital funds resource forecast. That was the first time we'd done that. We identified that there's bonding capacity in the property tax rate policy that there was some consensus on through the retreat, that basically about $1.75 combined rate. Essentially, there's about $40 million in capacity in the next 5 years. 10 in 17, 20 in 19, and 10 in 21. So we were looking at every other year issuances in that analysis. And then we also talked to you about impact fees, and there's really no material changes in the revenues forecast in those areas. And so today we're here to talk to you about kind of the projects that were requested in the budget process, or in the CIP process. One of the things that's important to note is we started this process with the departments in the middle of October. So it started before we got the feedback from you during the retreat process. In addition, we're trying to focus on and keep the department's original requests as they came in. So as we go through this, you may see some situations where you expected we might be advancing a project or changing the funding of a project, deferring a project based on some of the conversation that we heard. But what we're presenting to you now is simply the department's request and identifying how they're different than what's in the existing CIP. So as we went through the process with the departments, we focused on projects in the new 10th year. Every year we do a 10-year plan, so there's a new 10th year for projects to be considered. We carefully updated the costs and scopes for projects in 17 and 18. As we get further out, we're just making general assumptions about inflation. So we're really focusing on the years that are coming up that are likely to be appropriate, and we'll move forward with projects soon. And then, as I mentioned earlier, we looked at your retreat ideas and other priorities. We brought those in later in the staff process. Once the departments made those submissions, the engineering and finance department did technical reviews. We looked at the costing, we looked at the scope, we looked to see if there was any costs, obvious costs that might be missing in the department estimates. Do they have the furniture? Do they have the permit fees? Do they have those types of things that they might have overlooked? And then we also looked at the list of supplemental submissions that came in. And on occasion, there may have been some duplication where something came in both the supplemental process and in the CIP. And in that case, we made some judgments and decided, should this be a CIP project or should this be an ongoing operating budget item or a one-time operating budget item? So in some cases, some items that departments may have requested have been moved to the supplemental process, or some items that came in as a supplemental process may have been moved into the CIP piece of the puzzle. Oops. What we provided you was some information or some listings of, then they're a little complex. What we're trying to do is show you the information about what's changed. Last year we talked a lot about how you wanted to see what changed from the adopted 10-year CIP to the request, and then also when we come forward with the recommended budget, we'll talk about how that recommendation is a change. One of the things about the list that I want to make very clear is they are oriented to funding source. So in some cases, a project may appear in two sections or two different lists. When we come back to make a recommended budget, we will have projects all together with all their funding sources. But we wanted to approach this particular discussion from a funding perspective as opposed from a project-by-project perspective. An example of that would be something like the police operations facility, the Phase 2 project, where it may have impact fees and general funds, and it's going to show up on both the general fund list and the impact fee list. So the lists that you have, I'll kind of walk through them and explain them on a real high level now and then in a little bit more detail as we get into the discussion. But essentially what you have are a list that's peach coded, which is the requests by departments that are general funded operations. These are the types of CIP requests that would likely be funded by general funds, one-time general funds, or by the GO bonding that we've discussed. The second list that has green highlighting is the non-utility impact fees. The blue highlighting is water, and the kind of yellow, gold, brownish is wastewater. And the water and wastewater projects, impact fees are included on their lists. And as we go through this is the first time you have seen the utility-related CIP requests since you went through the rate process. We haven't brought them to you before this point in time.
Are we at that point where they can ask
Yeah,
questions?
so what I can do is kind of walk you through the list and kind of give you an idea of what's here. And then if you have technical questions about how the list works, I can try to answer those, and then we'll go on with the content of the presentation. So if you take the peach one, that's the general funded operations requests. If we look at, so the first grouping of projects, there's no change from the existing CIP. Their request was the same as what they have in the existing CIP. The second section is existing projects with proposed changes. Anywhere that you see coloration in the list of the projects, that's a case where there has been a requested change by the department. And again, I want to stress that these are requests. These aren't funded. This is the budget process, and through the process, the city manager will make a recommendation, and you'll ultimately approve the budget. So we are just looking at the list of requests. So essentially, to kind of walk you through, if you look at the streets one, it says new potential warranted traffic signals. The first line is what was in the adopted CIP. The second line is what the department requested. And the third line tells you how much the change is each year from the adopted budget to the request. And so, and then on the last column, we've added the operating cost or the estimated operating cost of the projects. These are, we only looked for operating costs that would be greater than 10,000, new operating costs greater than 10,000. And they're, again, some of these projects are many years out, so these are based on current dollars, and they haven't been, we haven't gone down and said this, this should be 10 positions instead of 12 positions or something like that. It's really just to give you a ballpark idea of what the operating costs might be of these facilities. They would include any staff that might be required as well as facilities operating costs. And to give you an example of a project that may be on the list twice, or I think I mentioned earlier the police facility. The police Phase 2 facility is on page 3 of the general fund list. It's the last item. And then it appears again on the green sheet where there are impact fees associated with it at the top of page 2 of the green sheet. So like I said, that's a case where we've split a project up because this is a funding presentation. And we've tried to reference you where possible to those kinds of funding differences. The impact fee list is designed similarly to the general fund list in that it's showing the changes highlighted in green. The water and wastewater lists are slightly different. In both of them, the first section is rate plan new projects. They're new projects. They aren't in the existing CIP. We didn't feel it was necessary to compare nothing to what's being added, so it's just to note for you. That's a slight difference in that these are new projects. They aren't in the existing plan. But the rest of the enterprise funds are presented in that change format where we're highlighting the change from the existing CIP. So any questions about the reports and how they're working?
Okay, so time is yours. Any questions you have in the first part of the presentation? Sherry?
I hope this isn't jumping over, but I just want to make sure I'm reading everything right at this point. So if you say save it, I got you.
I'll let you know.
We spent a lot of time, we had 2 work sessions talking about additional fire stations, like one up in Estrella, and we were going to study it. And I saw a study for something else in here, but I didn't see a study for that. And then I saw that fire station in 22. How does that work if the study says we need it earlier, or how do we just push it through the next year? How does that work with all this?
Mayor, Councilwoman, what we will do is we'll be bringing that request for that funding that study through the supplemental budget process. As we go through this, when you see the fire stations, the impact fee funded ones that are in the current program we've just left where they are fundable today without assuming advancements. The others that are new proposals we're recommending be deferred to a future impact fee project. So more than likely, there would not be funding issues next year if you decided to advance a fire station because you'd have to get through this study first. So we would probably be able to address those in next year's CIP process as well as a future impact fee process.
So that, just so I'm clear, because I know a couple people are very interested in that up in Estrella. So that's something that if the study says something we should advance and we work with our community partners, that's not a problem moving it just because it says 22. We can move that later if we all decide.
Correct. The one exception would be if it's impact fee funded, and we're going to talk about that throughout this presentation, there will be a financing issue because we won't have the actual impact fees. So we'll have to address, if there's a desire to advance projects, we'll have to deal with the financing or the funding of the advancement.
Look, that helps me a lot. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Joe?
A couple things on the debt service and the $1.75. Just for the record, I'm not tied to a particular rate. Everybody knows that. I will look whether I approve a bond sale, the actual impact that deals with the actual levy. So if the levy is reasonable, I'm in. If not, again, rate is not something to me. It's just a mathematical calculation. Second thing on the fire station. It kind of concerns me on a fire station to the extent that we're currently working with the developer to kind of update that development agreement. And from my perspective, since we are doing that, I would prefer myself that to be completed and finalized before we ever talk about a fire station. Because to me, we lose our leverage on any discussion on what contributions would be if we move ahead and plug in a fire station without having that done. That's my take on it. The second thing is on the study, and we've had that discussion on there. And again, it's just for the record. I respectfully disagree with my colleagues on here. I think since we can actually put the actual locations of the 4-minute, 5-minute, 6-minute response time on a GIS, we can map it. We saw it. That was all sitting there. We pretty much know where the next 2 fire stations are going to go. I firmly believe the 50 or 70,000, whatever that number happens to be, that was the number that Councilmember Stipp threw out. I do not believe that's a wise expenditure. So I just want to make sure I get it on the record from my perspective. Thank you. That's it.
Joanne?
Thank you. I've been researching quite a bit of items from last year to this year, and I'm trying to make sure I'm sticking with the right area you want us to stick
We're
with.
going
in
to
the-
tell you, and we're going to make you
Okay.
wait till.
Okay. Well, I do, first of all, appreciate the fire station discussion, because that was something that, quite frankly, I understand we need to wait on information from a study. My concern really is that, and I don't even think that it's a study issue to tell us, but just the information that was given to us 2 weeks ago firmly showed us that 2022 was not going to be that was going to be too far away. I mean, right now, just looking at this, and I understand we'll do it for technicalities. We'll wait to change it in the CIP, but in my mind, it's going to be. I don't want to say set in stone. It's going to be very obvious that this is going to have to be moved up. And so, to me, I think that, you don't have to show me a study to say, oh, yes, it's going to be 2019 or 2020 by the time we need it, because I think it's pretty obvious. But I'll wait technically for the information to come. But in my mind, it's already going to be moving forward. At where it's going to be located, that will be the question that the studies will tell us. And back to Mr. Pizzillo's, statement of the timing, the 4 minutes, the 5 minutes, 6 minute response, those are going to be critical. And I still firmly believe we need to have other ideas. CIP is one thing, and where we're going for the future of these stations, but the interim of what's going to be happening for public safety for our residents until that point is going to be very important. Now, should I or should I not get into some specific items on the CIP? Should I wait?
Why don't you wait for those, and
Okay.
the next section should give you the opportunity to do that.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay.
All right.
Thank you. Wally?
Do we have existing impact fees that we have not expended towards a fire station?
Yes, there are impact fees that are available to fund a fire station, so those would be used in whatever fire station move forward first.
Can they go to wherever the fire station is located, or are they specific to the area that the impact fees were collected from?
I believe the impact fees, the older impact fees that we have now, just need to be spent on a fire purpose. That is a infrastructure item that would be eligible for impact fees, but they're not designated to a certain area of the city, so we could use them in any of the projects.
And we do not have enough impact fees now in hand or on the books that we can go and build a station today. Is that correct?
Correct. We do not have enough impact fees, even with those resources. We have about 1.2 to 1.3 million in other older impact fees.
Okay.
Stations are in the $5 million range. We don't have, we probably just have I haven't looked at the impact fees, from the current ones, but I'm sure it's probably less than $1 million sitting in the funds for some of these other
Well,
areas.
it makes sense to me to put it out to 22 till we can get a handle on how we're going to pay for it, and we can always move it back because this is not set in stone. And we know that the public safety demands on our community are increasing for police and for fire, and we're certainly going to do our best to meet the residents' needs, but we have to be very responsive. We have to have the money to be able to do this. And my next question to you then is, you said for the police administration building, part of it is impact fees and part of it is general fund. Does fire have anything like that stored away somewhere?
No, Councilwoman, we do not. The reason that there are general funds in the police phase 2 project is there's portions of that project that are not eligible for impact fees.
Got it.
Because they're administrative functions, and
Okay.
the impact fees cannot be used for those purposes.
Okay. Now, am I remembering correctly that our Director of Finance, Mr. Lang, said that we would not be able to go out to encumber any additional bonding for several years?
We're forecasting we have $10 million next year, $20 million 2 years after that, and $10 million after that.
Okay.
It's the council's prerogative how those bonds are used. They could be used for specific projects. They could be used to finance advancing impact fee
Okay.
projects. We would recommend against using them to directly fund the type of a growth project, because then we're committed to allocating bonds to future projects, future growth projects in that
Okay.
particular area. It doesn't mean we can't do it, but that would be a recommendation.
Okay, so in your opinion, is a fire station a growth project?
The fire stations that are in the adopted CIP are growth projects because they are funded with impact fees. So they were identified, and most fire stations, new fire stations, would be growth.
I would think
Obviously,
so.
if we, as
Yeah.
you know, in the way we've designed our impact fee program right now, our whole city is in an impact fee area.
Okay, thank you very much.
I guess I'm last. Well, yeah, you have the special word, council, growth. Growth means rooftops. Growth means we need to look at moving the city forward. And as far as the study goes, when I first got on the council, I used to say, oh, these studies, and I went through that. But what it does, it verifies. And I think we are going to find, after listening to the chief, that we're going to find new things. And we're going to know if a fire station in the position that it's in now is sustainable and the right place for it to be. We don't know that. Now, we can all sit here as council people and say, well, we know better because the neighborhood called me and they told me. Well, yes, I understand the neighborhood and when they have emergency. I'm very sympathetic to that. And we're constantly talking to police and fire, making sure that we can cover those areas and we can be there when they need us. So I'm putting my confidence in the recommendation of our chief and in the study that's going to come forth. And I think with technology and ever-changing out there, there may be something that will come forth that'll highlight that. So that's my only comment. So with that, you're on for the next.
All righty. So first, I just want to give you an overview of kind of how we're going to walk through the rest of the presentation. We're going to walk through the one-time general fund or GO bond requests. We're going to talk about, in some cases, there are items that were discussed in the CIP project that are not on these lists for a number of reasons. Some are technical, some are because it was just too early to put them in the 10-year program. But I'm going to make sure that you hear about every project that was discussed during the process. There's going to be some recommendations for some project deletions, recommendations to defer some projects to a future impact fee study. We'll discuss a little bit about the facilities master plan that's moving forward. And then again, I mentioned before that your ideas are also included. In the water and wastewater area, we'll go over the rate plan related projects, mainly just a listing for you to see. There's also some items for future consideration that came up through those CIP conversations that we're bringing to your attention through this presentation. And then finally, in the impact fee area, there are some technical corrections. There are 2 new project requests, and there's some advancements being requested. So to walk through the general fund requests, or the general fund items, or the first thing I want to do is draw your attention to that there are 3 amounts that have been removed. They aren't on the list that you have before you because they are a technical correction. There are a few items that were in the adopted CIP that will be addressed with the Parks Asset Management funding. So we haven't put them on the list. They were in the adopted CIP. They're shown here. Basically, $480,000 in FY20 of general funds has been recommended for removal, as well as $500,000 in 20 and $324 in 24. And those again are just cases where the asset management program in parks will cover those costs. There's also some projects that were discussed or that are on the list that we're recommending be deferred to a future impact fee program. There are 2 fire stations requested in the new section that are items that we would recommend move forward through an impact fee project. Let me get caught up on my notes. There was discussion of a 4th community park. However, it was one that when we sat down and we talked about it, we felt like with all the activity going on in parks, it was too early to start talking about adding that project. At best, land might have fallen into the 10th year of this plan. So we didn't want to go forward with a partial project without really vetting it. And then there are some needs in the case of the impact fee program to update existing projects for inflation. We did not assume inflation when we developed the last impact fee or IIP plan, so there is not inflation. If we had projects that you were seriously talking about advancing or funding, we've gone ahead and updated those cost estimates so that we will be picking up the inflation, so you are funding a project that we believe it's the proper amount to fund it at. But there's most of the impact fee projects have not been updated for potential inflationary costs. The other item we discussed, but is not included in the lists in front of you, are the items related to facilities master plan. That that plan hadn't been adopted at this point in time. But what we wanted to do is at least show you the projects that were kind of talked about as potential projects in the future in the CIP. Workstation density at City Hall, some expansion at the GMC, warehouses, and those types of facilities. A few items will be coming through as supplemental requests that may address some short-term, near-term facilities requirements.
Just wait.
Sorry.
I know this is hard. I know it's hard. Write it down.
It's not far. The next thing that I wanted to do is go over the the priorities that we heard that we should be using for using those bond funds. And so what we heard was that the gathering place concept, and we can come up with a new name for it if that's not what you prefer, that would be a high priority for the use of the bond funds. And so here we have the information on that, on the recreation center, the aquatics facility, and the community park. In the case of the community park, it's impact fee funded, so it would have to be advanced. So I'll show you where those are on the list. The recreation center is on the first page, about a third of the way or a quarter of the way up from the bottom. It is in the existing CIP with general funds. So if we move that to bond funding, it will free up some general funds that are currently programmed in the CIP that may be available for other projects. If you go to the third page of the general fund list, the 100-acre site master plan is the first project. Note that would be happening next year per this request. That has to happen before anything else can happen under the assumption that these facilities would be at that location. And that is the assumption in this presentation. We're assuming no cost for land associated with these projects. The next item is the Central Goodyear Park. It's the next one down on the list. That's the community park, the 30-acre park. Note that it's on this general fund list for $461,000. That is the inflation. And these are in thousands, not in dollars. Mm-hmm. And so that's what's there. Mm-hmm. The next project down is the community aquatic facility, and it's a new project, so it's been added to this list. And then if you go to the impact fee list, the green list, on the first page, the community park master plan has been advanced to 19. And then at the bottom of that list, the park itself has been requested for advancement into 19 and 20. And that's one of those situations where if you opt to advance that project, we'll have to address financing of that advancement because there would not be adequate impact fees based on the current estimates to move those forward. The next priority we believed we heard for the GO bonds would be the being able to find a way to advance that police operations facilities. It would require some kind of loan or financing to advance those impact fees. And as I mentioned before, there are about $3 million in that project that are not eligible for impact fees, so they would have to be general fund or GO bond funded. We added fire stations to this list simply because of your recent conversations, just to put it up here and let you know that it was on our radar, but that we know that this study is pending and we'll wait for that project. And in addition, you did have an emphasis on public safety. And then the City Hall project, you'll see on the list today, it's at the bottom of page 1 of the general fund, which is the peach. You'll notice that it is stayed in the same years. What has happened is it's been updated for better cost and inflation. Again, this submission was done prior to the discussions that happened through the retreat process. So this is presenting you the request as it came in. Our plan and our understanding from the directions we've received is that the City Hall is not the highest priority for the bonds. And given the available bonds, it will likely be eliminated from the CIP when we come forward with a recommendation.
Sorry.
I don't know if I can stand that.
I'm sorry.
I'm feeling pain, everybody.
I saw that.
Do we have to totally eliminate it? I can't see it in print. No wish list out there?
We'll keep it on a report so we see it all the time and we know it's gone. But it would require an additional analysis of assessed valuations 10 years out, and we're still so new to the new world of how assessed valuations are working that it's kind of tentative to be moving forward. And then to remind you what our capacity is for GO bond funding. So the capacity in terms of dollars we've identified is about $40 million in the next 5 years. This is the voter authorization. And as an example, oops, is that working? Yeah. To give you a sense of kind of the information, the Parks and Recreation Facility voter approved capacity is $32 million. If you wanted to fund the Recreation Center, fund the Aquatics Center, and fund and finance advancement of the community facility, it would use about all of that $32 million, if not all of it, just to let you know. And that would use 30, so that would, it would not necessarily take away all your GO bond that are available, because we would use impact fees to pay back the financing portion, but it would take away that voter authority. We'll break now and let you raise questions
Open for
about
discussion. Who would like to be first? Joe?
I agree with the priority about as far as the aquatics and that the amount of money goes for that. With the police operations facility, second, I know there's a lot of heartburn over City Hall, but it's my understanding that was pushed out as a result of our discussion because the other two were the priority. So I'm in agreement that those other prior to take precedent over the City Hall, and I know, I know. So, and I realize there's some heartburn with that, but I really believe we got to take care of those needs, for our citizens first. And I know City Hall will play into that, but at the same token, that central part of the city really needs an aquatic center, really needs a gathering spot. They don't have it. And, with the world the way that it is today, we've been looking and we finally got at least a police facility going up. But that second phase or that third phase, whatever that phase happens to be, I see that as a priority also. So I'm in agreement with what you mentioned as far as the CIP.
Thank you. Wally?
I agree with Councilman Pizzillo on both of his points. And I have a question, just to refresh my memory. The Central Community Park that we're talking about, is this the one that we're talking about for West Goodyear?
You're looking at, that is the community park number 1. It would be sited at the 100-acre park location. So it would be part of the Gathering Place project.
I'm sorry. Okay. Then I don't have a question. I just was thinking it was in west, more west than it is. So thank you. That's fine.
Sherry?
I also agree with your priorities. I think we discussed it a lot at the retreat that, we really need to get going on the amenities, especially in the central park. I did notice that we have the recreation center, the aquatics, and the park. They seem to be kind of staggered. Although they're staggered with the bond funding, would they be able to come online at approximately the same time? Because it'd be very nice to open it up as one area rather than, or does it have to be in that phasing?
Councilwoman, we will, as we go forward and try to balance the recommended CIP with this direction, we will look at what those opportunities are. It is possible that we just won't be able to pull it off because of the way the funding is built in there. But certainly we'll take into consideration that the goal would be to open them all at the same time. And I guess I would raise a question. Would you prefer to defer the whole facility in order to have them all open at once, or is there a priority order in what you'd like to see come on first or second?
I think our talk was we really wanted the recreation center on first, but if, at least for me, I would like it to be some way in a nice area. You just don't want it in the middle of dirt. I mean, so if that's, and the idea was the park was going to surround it with the aquatic center kind of around it. So I don't know if there's a way to make it look complete, even if we have to phase it. Does that make sense? You know,
I can see the city manager wants to respond to that. Go ahead, Brian.
Well,
I dream.
part of it, we have a master plan that we'll be conducting, and it will look at the locations of each of these different amenities. And as part of that, we can look at if we end up having to phase it. And again, going back to Ms. Wingenroth's point, we'll see whether we can potentially bring it all online, and maybe that's 2019 or something, or 2020, or we can get part of this in earlier. But certainly phasing is something that's pretty easy to work around in terms of location. And what do you do to make it look good in the intervening period before you get the next phases? But that'd be part of that master plan process we're going through next year, assuming that gets funded.
No, I appreciate you moving that up. I think that's really important for our residents. So I do agree with that. And then everything else I agree with both Wally and Joe.
Joanne?
Thank you. Oh, well, I think we're all on the same page in priorities, it sounds like. And I agree with the Vice Mayor that we should look at phasing when possible and making it look somewhat like it's complete as you add to it. I mean, if it is the rec center and all we have is grass, then all we have is grass, but at least it's something that's looking more complete. And I guess a couple of the questions on a few other items, and back to this discussion and the way this looks like is, yes, it looks like we're saying let's move forward, but it's still another 5 years in the planning and money wise. Where if we can bring it all together, and like you said, maybe it's in 2019, then wonderful. But one of the things that I wanted to make sure of, now this says, am I reading this right? For fiscal year 17, $100,000 to do a feasibility study to relocate the train park?
There was one of the council, that was a council idea that came up during the retreat discussions. And what that $100,000 includes is both kind of a master plan as to where would be the best place to to take a train, as well as relocation of the train should it be able to be moved to an existing location. So that's all we've assumed at this point in time. So it's both relocation and a plan.
Well, I would hate to see that. I mean, I know we had that conversation, want to have it done, but I'd hate to spend that kind of money and it be a book on the shelf because it has nowhere to go yet. As we're changing plans for other areas, I guess that's my concern. So it can't be. You're just looking as to where to put it. I mean, it couldn't be part of the 100-acre site master plan. I mean, it's just of where can we put it. But we have no money to then do it once we figure out where we can put it.
Correct, unless it can be incorporated into something like a community park or one of the facilities that's being constructed.
Oh, we have our money man coming up. He's going to address something here.
So,
And then parks, yes.
Right.
Yeah.
And I,
Just wait, there's a little more information. Go ahead.
okay. Alrighty. So a couple things I wanted to point out is there's a feasibility study as part of this as well, as to what we could do with the facility. There's also, remember, I think I stressed early on, if it's in Peach, it is not currently funded. This is just what the department requested. As we move,
looking at my peach paper.
as we move forward, if it says change for consideration on the same line item, if you don't have color, that means it's a request. So none of these items are funded if they are noted as change for consideration. So having your feedback provides us some guidance and information about priorities. But in the end, we'll have to balance it within the resources that are available.
When we do the study for the 100-acre park and the rec center and the park, just all of that together, I think that as we're also looking at the phasing, I need to see the complete picture. And I know you put in here estimated operating costs, but it's one thing to say, we want all this, but this is what it's going to cost us ongoing every year. Balancing that out with, we also know we're going to need a fire station and more police officers. Balancing this all together, I need to see the big picture of it all. And so, I do appreciate that column you're putting in there, but I think at the end, when we do have this full study of phasing, that's got to include how we're going to operate it ongoing. And I think one last thing that this came up, and I don't know, I'm going to put it in here because I don't know where else to put it. Something that has been discussed. Tomorrow night, I'm speaking to the Vanderbilt Farms HOA, and there has been some street items and things that they've brought up in the last few months, in the last year, and we've been trying to address things, and I know, as we go forward, we will put their items in our plans. But one thing that did come up for the whole, and it came to my attention in this area, but it really goes across the whole city, and that is, we talk about street improvements, we talk about facility improvements, all these master plans. One little thing that, and Luke Albert, I give you great credit for, he's always a great streets guy to talk to, is a sidewalk master plan, for better, lack of better words. But, we have pockets of areas where we don't have sidewalks. And that's been brought up that, and, especially at the end of the year when we have some one-time funds that we try to put towards big things. But some areas of sidewalks aren't large ticket item pieces, but can make a huge improvement for a neighborhood. And I know that this is late in the game to bring it up, but it really just kind of came to my attention this last month. And so I would love to see, I was going to save it till the end of the night, Brian, but this is really a perfect place to bring it in.
Yes, and I could have stopped you, but I let you go on
Well,
that
thank
about
you,
it. So
thank you.
But
I just wanted to plug that in as we think about areas and adding sidewalks that, they may be $100,000, but it would make such a great impact to an area. So I just wanted to throw that in there.
Thank you, Wally.
Thank you.
I just wanted to remind council that the Centennial Committee worked on the train station, and when the Centennial Committee was dissolved, we formed a 501c3 to fund the restoration of that building. And until we know as a foundation where the train station is going to be located, it's very difficult for us to raise the $5 million that we feel we're going to need to move it, to place it wherever the city will put it, and to refurbish it. But I can understand and I appreciate even having a conversation about some type of a semi-master plan so that we would know where it's going, because we've talked about it. I've been on council, I think, 4 years maybe or so, and I talked about it 4 years before then when we acquired it, when Councilmember Holland was very instrumental in helping the city find it and buy it and move it and store it. So while $100,000 may sound a lot, it is probably, but it's not just going to be for the train station. It's going to be for the whole, wherever it's going to end up. It could be a different park entirely. So I don't want the residents to think that we're not aware that we need to raise the money to fund it, and we're ready to do it as soon as the city tells us where it can go. Okay? You're
Sherilyn,
welcome.
you have anything?
I'm much like Joanne. I'm really not sure if this is appropriate, but when she mentioned sidewalks, I would like to just, as a comment for awareness, is that when you have sidewalks and they're rolled sidewalks and you don't make a ramp at a corner, it's still inaccessible. It may look to the uneducated eye like a rolled the rolled curb would be satisfactory, but some of our workers in parks will remember when my niece in her wheelchair tried to go off the rolled curb because we didn't have the cutouts at the time, and she was dumped into the street. It's much too steep, and so I just want to again, it's
You
a
want someone
comment
to
for
write
awareness.
it down so we have a record of that, right?
Well, just to bring awareness,
right.
because it does not make. For example, when Irina Gary passed, I could not take a card to her family because there was no way in Arnold Manor for me to get to the house. And so I had to put it in the mail. So, I mean, it's just enough.
Thank you. Well, just to make it clear to everybody, the night that I came before you on the city center and the recreational department, I wanted them both. So I was not disappointed. I've been talking about that west side for ages, about getting a park, a ballpark, anything over there. And I've had the residents there talk to me about that. So that's back in 2005, okay? So for me, it's a really moving forward of having that. And I understand the thought behind all of you on the council about not the city hall this time. So I have no regrets, but when you mention city hall, for somebody that was that involved in it when I was not on council, I do get a couple heartbeats. And so I will always feel that way until I see a day that something is. And even having the recreational center there, that's part of the city center. So, I mean, to me, that's just wonderful. And since you brought up the train station, I just think that we need to look at that when we're doing the plan for the parks and the whole thing. You know, we just need to look. We need to be able to come out with a yay or nay on that, and then we can figure out then where we would place it so they can collect their money. We'd like to do some fundraising, and you can't do it right now. So, so that's my only comment on this. So you have the floor.
Okay. Water and wastewater. Water has about $151 million in requests. That basically, as I mentioned before, the first part of the list is just new items added through the rate planning process. Essentially, the rate plan calls for $41 million in debt to support, or bonds, enterprise-funded bonds to pay for projects. And there's about $3.3 million in operating funded projects that are included in the rate plan. There is one unfunded new request for a city tree plan project. Essentially, it'd be a plan, developing a plan to address water conservation through landscaping in the right-of-ways. And then there are some projects that came up during the discussion, as I mentioned earlier. I'm going to let you know about everything that we talked about or came through. There is a water plant in the impact fee program. It ultimately needs full funding. The impact fee program can only accept the first 10 years worth of cost associated with using that plant. Its capacity will serve much more than 10 years worth of growth. So eventually we will have to address full funding for that plant. And then there's also a discussion about an additional or a new water acquisition lease that is not presented here, but that was discussed in the process. In terms of wastewater, the CIP program is much smaller than water. It's a $60 million program or request. The rate plan funds about $11.1 million, and the first $7.5 million of that is debt financed. In discussion in wastewater was full funding for the 6 to 8 MGD expansion of the Goodyear reclamation plant or water reclamation facility. That's another one of those impact fee projects that's out there that the 10 years, it will last longer than the current 10-year plan, or it'll address growth for longer than that plan. So when we need to move forward with that, we'll also have to address financing for that item. One of the things I wanted to let you know about the water submission, we still have not done the technical balancing of this plan against the rates. About $6 million of what water has requested in 17 will have to be deferred to 18. So we'll be working with the department before we come back to you to present the recommended CIP. There are some technical corrections in the impact fees that I just wanted to line out some bigger ones. On water, there was, we did not have, for the reverse osmosis facility, we did not have the full amount in that's available in the impact fee program. So that's that $5.2 million addition. It's just a technical correction. And then in water, I'll talk about it a little bit more when we get to impact fees, but there are requests related to a new impact fee study and an audit. In wastewater, I believe there was also technical corrections of a similar nature where we have revised items. One thing to note in wastewater, there's a request of $1 million advancement for the Vados injection well project. We'll have to evaluate if the resources would come in soon enough to do that or address financing that. And I think you wanted to break at water and wastewater.
Any questions on this section? Councilman Pizzillo?
I just want to make sure I understood you correctly on the reconciliation. We had a water rate study, and we had water rates that were going to be implemented over, the next 5 years or something along those lines. And in that, it was making some assumptions that there was going to be certain projects that justified those rates. And I just want to make sure I hear you right. We're still in the process of reconciling the request with the actual money that was put in to drive the rates that we adopted. Has that been reconciled, or you're still working on that?
We have reconciled in total. Now we're looking at the issuance of bonds by year that were authorized, that are supported by the rates. And it appears that we do need to delay some water projects to line it up with the available issuance of bonds. It's a lot more complex when it involves bonds. We'll be able to do some cash flow analysis, and that may not have to do that. But at this point in time, just on the surface, it appears that they've got a little bit too much in 17, and we'll have to defer some of that to 18.
I just want to make sure there's not projects that'll be parachuting in that's not part of the rate structure, which means we run a shortfall. That's kind of what I'm getting to.
In the finance department and budget department, we're looking very closely to ensure that these are projects that were discussed and that were included in the IWMP, and that we are ensuring that the projects can move forward. If there needs to be a change, we will either ourselves or the Public Works Department will come to you and talk about that.
Just a quick follow-up. I know in our strategic, when we met on our retreat, one of the issues had come up with how can we stretch our water resources as a result of a plan. And it's my understanding they were looking at a plan on our medians, the type of plants that will be in there, water use, type of plants in our parks, things that slow down growth, slow down the need to trim them more often, stretch out our water use. Where does that fit in this process, or is that something we'll see in the actual supplementals, or is that in another parks plan? I'm just curious where that shows up.
Well, the tree plan, I believe, will address right-of-way, landscape in the right-of-way.
Okay.
There is also a proposal in the supplementals to address a potential homeowner-based program to explore grass versus using trees and those types of things. I'm not sure if the tree plan will address parks or not.
Could somebody come up and
That's
address
Nathan,
that?
can you come up?
Oh, we have both of them, Nathan and Mark. Okay. Perfect.
Mayor, Lord, members of the council, the citywide tree plan is looking at various aspects. Through that plan, recommendations for the city to increase the shade by 25% potentially, helping would be with drought-tolerant trees, helping increase quality of life, and offsetting the heat island effect for the city. Also energy, looking at part of right tree, right place that can help offset energy costs for buildings, having trees next to buildings for shade and so forth. Definitely that's part of that aspect to stretch our water resources much further. I think to answer your question more in depth is the Water Conservation Committee is really going to be looking at how we can stretch our water resources much further by looking at the outdoor water use. And they'll be addressing various aspects of outdoor water use.
So that's something that'll come before us a little further down the road.
That is correct.
Okay, thank you. You answered my
very much.
But
question.
that's all for public use too. I mean, this is going to be a campaign, right? To the
Yes,
public.
yes, Mayor
That's
Lord.
it. All right.
That is correct.
Thank you.
Mayor, Councilmember Pizzillo, if I may, with regard to plant densities, we're currently working with engineering to look at the design guidelines and ordinances related to right-of-way and tree planting and densities. And so that will be coming forward as well, and possibly present it through the Water Conservation Committee.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Any other questions? Sherry?
This may be a Mark question since it's a CAP question. On page 1 of the water, it says CAP subcontract capital charges for 284. What is that exactly? What does that cover?
It's required by all subcontractors through the Central Arizona Project. It's the canal debt. So all subcontractors must pay that regardless of whether you take water or not. It's paying that debt back to the U.S. government.
Okay, so regardless of whether there's a shortage at Lake Mead or not, that will be consistent no matter what. That isn't our share of the water.
That is correct.
And our share of the water, if there's a shortage, could increase or decrease depending.
If there's a shortage, our subcontract would be decreased pro rata based on the shortage.
Okay, I wasn't sure what that one was for. It wasn't for the
It will
water,
not be
though.
decreased. The capital will not be decreased. That is we owe a certain dollar amount by I think 2046, so we have to pay off the federal debt for that.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Any other questions?
Impact fees. The message here is essentially there's 2 new projects being requested. One is the biannual audit that's required by state statute that we are now putting in the impact in the recommending it in the CIP. It'll be put in there every other year. It's funded by all the existing impact fees in proportion to their total revenue stream. Then there's a recommendation that we pursue a new infrastructure financing plan or impact fee plan next year, that we bring in consultants to do the detailed work that needs to be done with the utilities. I understand there was changes in the IWMP process that may change some of the assumptions about how growth was determined in the impact fee program. So that's why there's some additional cost in the utility impact fee funds. And then in addition, there's the overall study. And again, that's funded by the impact fees themselves. There are several advancements reflected in the impact fees. And again, I've mentioned it earlier, to advance them, if there are not, the impact fees have not materialized, would require some kind of financing or funding or loan in order to do that. And as we also discussed earlier, not every impact fee project is fully funded. Some need to have inflation added, and some are these large projects where their service will extend well beyond 10 years.
Yeah. Joanne?
Just to make sure so I understand this, are we speaking about $500,000 or is it total $250,000 each for these reports and analysis?
At this point, we're estimating $500,000 based on prior studies to do this. The utility piece is very complex, and as I mentioned, they changed some of the growth assumptions or some of the assumptions used to develop the IWMP. That will have to be incorporated into the impact fee program update so that we're consistent in our assumptions. And they will also need to reproject growth requirements as a result. And then the other piece of it is the total, pulling the whole plan together with the fire and the police and the parks and doing all of the analysis, the public process, and all those types of things.
So is this, I mean, I know we had to have a large study when the whole impact fee change occurred and our legislators changed all this. So is this kind of another hidden expense to the city that's taking place because of this change in legislation, or is this combination with growth also?
The statute requires that your plan be updated every 5 years. We're recommending, because of the growth that we're experiencing and because of some of in some cases our impact fee, our assumptions about permitting activity are not being met. So we're recommending that we redo the study at this point in time to ensure that we don't get into a situation where if we have a project in the impact fee study, we are required to deliver that project in the 10-year window.
Right.
And so if the impact fees don't come in, we're still required to deliver that project.
Gotcha. Thanks.
Just to give you a quick outline of what projects were there, there's a request to advance the police operations facility. There's also a request to advance and retime the 30-acre park. And then there are a series of technical corrections very similar to what we saw earlier. Probably calling out the most significant one, as you'll see in fire, there's $1.5 million that moves between two projects. The apparatus is not tied to a specific facility, so we've put it in its own project rather than a project with a fire station. And then we've added the impact fee study, and we've shown the older library impact fees as being programmed for next year. There's also in the utilities, as I mentioned before, an advancement and some technical corrections. I don't know if there's any questions about the impact fees.
Thank you very much, and thank you for cooperating tonight with the questioning time frame. And council, thank you. It was great. So would you like to just do the last step here?
Can we do one update for you on the budget process itself? We have the calendar here. This is a calendar you've seen before. We're making a recommendation that we change the calendar. Given what's going on with the state and the census revenues, it is very difficult for us at this point in time to forecast revenue. So we can't come to you with supplementals with recommendations associated with them until we can get to a point that we can balance the budget. So at this point, we're recommending that we do not schedule the March 28th supplemental discussion or the April 4th final expenditure review, and that we plan that we'll have the April 18th and April 25th sessions to deal with the recommended budget. It's at this point in time, we would have to be extremely conservative in preparing our revenue estimates, and we'd rather wait and see if we can get better information.
I think we all are nodding our heads as we're sitting around the table. I think that's a good decision to have made, so we appreciate it. And thank you very much for today. All right, I'm going to adjourn this meeting, and then we're going to go to our regular meeting. Meeting adjourned.